friends, welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Stacy and I am the Chapter Conundrum, and in today's video I want to talk to you guys about books that hooked me right from chapter 1. Books that had me invested, where I needed to keep reading to know what was going to happen. And I thought this would be fun for anybody who maybe is finding themselves feeling a little bit slumpy or just needing a book to grab them like right from the go, especially if you're a fellow plot reader and you need to have like a significant plot curiosity to keep you going. This video is for you. So I have some fantasy, some thriller horror, and some romance or fantasy romance in here. So hopefully if you find yourself in this kind of slumpy situation, one of those genres is more kind of like what you're in the mood for, and one of these will help grab you. And I'm gonna start off with the thriller horrors because I have a feeling if you're a little bit slumpy, you may want something a little bit easier to sink your teeth into, maybe a little less dense. And the first thriller we're going to talk about is The Couple Next Door by Sherry LaPena. And essentially with the premise of this, you have a couple who is going next door for a dinner party, and their babysitter cancels on them last minute, but they're just next door, like in the next townhouse over, so they decide, okay, the baby's napping anyway, we're just going to bring the monitor, go check on her like every 20-30 minutes. And at the end of chapter 1, at the end of the evening of this dinner party, the couple comes home to find that their baby is not in the crib. So immediately, this opens with a stolen baby. And from there, the characters contact the police and the story unfolds. So yeah, definitely this one had me gripped right from chapter 1. I needed to know what was going to happen. I needed to know the character motivations behind what happened. I needed to see the characters grappling with this situation, what the possibilities were. And yeah, I was just invested very early. Next up, we're going to talk about another thriller, this one a Japanese thriller, and that's Confessions by Kanai Minato. And essentially this one opens with a school teacher teaching her final class. She's announcing to the class that she's retiring, and she goes into the reasons why she's making this decision. But at the very end of the first chapter, there is something that happens that had me audibly gasping. And this is the first time I can really remember a book making me audibly gasp while reading a reveal. So definitely this one is one that hooked me right from chapter 1. Now, I will say that this one has a bit of a longer chapter 1. There are only, I think, 6 chapters in there. And this one is told from different perspectives. So every chapter you get someone new, and they all sort of have interesting information to contribute to the story. But yeah, this is definitely a great experience with a thriller. I will say check out trigger and content warnings for this if you need to. There's definitely a scene with an animal in here that I know some readers who are okay with most things may not be okay with. So just know that going in. But yeah, otherwise I had a fantastic time with this, and think you will too. My next one is maybe sort of cheating for this because it doesn't have chapters, but I want to talk about Dolores Claiborne here because it hooked me pretty immediately. Right out of the gate, you have Dolores Claiborne, who is a character who is arrested on suspicion of murdering the elderly lady that she's been working as a caretaker for. And one of the main reasons that she's suspected is that people also suspect years ago she murdered her husband and got away with it. So right away you're sucked into a story with incredibly high stakes because this woman's reputation and livelihood are on the line here. But the main thing that hooked me in this is Dolores's personality. She has a way of just being very blunt, but that's also very funny. I didn't really expect this book with that premise to be funny, but there are several moments in here that had me laughing. There's definitely a lot of like darker, more serious stuff that you would expect from that premise too. But right from the get-go, Dolores's character and that setup had me hooked early. If you do decide to try this one out, I definitely recommend the audio because it does give you kind of some better stopping points than maybe the physical copy would, and also because the narration is just excellent. Moving into more of a horror, I want to talk about I'm Not a Serial Killer by Dan Wells, the first book in the John Cleaver series. And this series follows John Cleaver, you guessed it, and he's a young man whose family runs the mortuary in town. So right in the opening of this, you have a very interesting, unique character voice in a character who is obsessed with serial killers, put in the position of encountering the local dead bodies. And right in chapter 1, you have his family dynamic, his character voice, and some people turning up dead in town. It definitely had me hooked right away from chapter 1. Moving into some fantasy, but that also has some darker stuff, chapter 1 of Blood Over Brighthaven by Emma Wong hooked me hard. So right away in here, you have a character on the run with their friends and family. They are running from some unknown thing that is killing them off. They are trying to get to Brighthaven as refugees. And everything that I saw in the first chapter here had me emotionally connecting with the characters. very curious about this world and what is happening in it. Why is Brighthaven safe? Like, there were just so many questions I had from information gleaned in the first chapter, and just you could tell from the tone that this was not going to pull its punches. So that, coupled with the fact that I really loved the Sword of Kaigen, had me instantly hooked in this one. The next fantasy I want to talk about is Winds of Strife by U.G. Gutman. And for this one, I'm gonna just read you the first couple lines because I think immediately it gives you things to wonder about and question, and it definitely had me pulled into the story very quickly based on that information. So the very first lines of the prologue: the plan had collapsed. Adrienne was compelled to admit it when a clamoring mob gathered outside her cabin. Dozens of villagers were waving torches and makeshift weapons while chanting about burning witches. So you get from this right away that you have Adrienne, who's probably a witch, definitely very much in trouble in a tense situation, and that there's some bigger plot or plan that has gone very wrong. And all of that is something that definitely has me very interested and invested right from the go. I have questions about what this plan was. I need to know whether Adrienne gets out of this situation okay, how that happens, if it happens. And you also know from the synopsis of this that you follow a witch hunter who's trying to destroy the witch hunters from within. So definitely there's a lot of intrigue here right from the go. I had questions, I was curious, and this is one that definitely has me interested right from the start. The next fantasy I want to talk about requires that you're in a certain spot in a series, but even despite that, this was one of the strongest examples of a book that instantly hooked me right from the first line that I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't mention it here, and that is Changes, book 12 in the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. And I cannot tell you anything about how this opens because it would be a massive spoiler for the series. But just know that the title of this one is very apt. You open with a line that is a bombshell of information that has you having so many questions and needing some answers and needing to know what's going to happen from there. So definitely that one hooks you instantly. And the pacing of that one is also very quick as well, so it keeps your interest throughout very well, especially if you're 12 books deep into a series and you have that level of investment with these characters already. So yeah, can't really tell you more than that, but if you're caught up to that point in the Dresden Files and you need a book to hook you right away, Changes for sure. Moving into more of a fantasy romance direction, one that had me hooked very early was Heartless Hunter by Kristen Ciccarelli. And this is the first book in a duology, so it's not a huge commitment. But right away from the prologue in chapter 1 in here, you find out that we have had a successful rebellion. So there's been a change in power. Witches used to rule. Now something called the Blood Guard rules. They're out to kill witches, and our main character is a witch who's now in hiding. So obviously that premise and that setup injects a lot of tension for the story. It definitely leaves you with a lot of questions and curiosities as to like, okay, why did this rebellion happen? Like what's the bigger picture here? And coupled with the fact that this premise is an enemies to lovers romance, and you have this witch in hiding who's going to be trying to date someone in the Blood Guard hierarchy to figure out where they're holding witches to help some escape. You know that this is going to be very tension filled and very high stakes at times, and man, it definitely was. But yeah, that introduction and that premise had me hooked very early. So definitely would recommend this one in that category. And then the last two books I want to talk about today move into contemporary romance. So the first one of those is The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. And in the setup of this one, you have, I think she's a PhD student, but anyhow, she's at the university, and one of her best friends is coming to see her in the lab, and her best friend wants to date her ex. And she's very adamant about convincing her best friend, like, you know, go for it. I'm over this. Like, don't worry about girl code. And as part of having to convince her best friend, who's like not really buying that, she grabs the first guy that's near to her saying like, oh, I've moved on. I'm now dating him. And she kisses him in front of her friend to kind of like convince her friend. But anyways, within the first chapter, you get to see how all the characters react to this situation, where they go from here, and just how funny and how enjoyable the inner monologue of the main character is going to be in this novel based on this crazy situation. And her character, coupled with how this other character reacts to this whole situation, definitely had me very invested in this adult romance very early. So if you, like me, tend to enjoy really reactive, emotional characters who tell you how they're feeling and what they're thinking, this is definitely one that should get you very invested very early. Then the 10th and last book I want to talk about today is Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young. And this is a contemporary romance that deals with the accidental pregnancy trope. But don't let that scare you, because that is a trope that I also hate, and I loved this book. This was 5 stars for me. And essentially it's the humor of the main character that hooks me into this story immediately. So right away, you open with our main character who's at a Halloween party, and she ends up meeting our love interest there, and just the banter and the humor that they have within each other, also just like the heartfelt relatable moments that they share in their initial meeting, had me hooked into this story hard. I also think that there was something special about this one for me, given that it's by a Canadian author who's from my home province, because right away, like, the tone of the characters and the writing just gave me kind of homey vibes too. But really it was the humor and the banter that stood out to me super early on in this one. So yeah, definitely recommend this one if humor is what's going to get you invested in contemporary romance. And like I said, do not be scared of this trope, because I also hate it and loved this book. So yeah, highly recommend that one. So let me know down below in the comments, what books hooked you right from the beginning, and what was it about them that hooked you early? If you guys have recommendations in that vein, definitely leave them down below, because this is something I may come back to next time I'm in a slump, to try and figure out what I should pick up to try and kind of like get me out of it a little bit. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out if you want to, and have a great day. Bye!